Hello, I am Phineas 12 Gauge. This is the Apostate Seminary, and today I am stepping away from the Bible, as I will once or twice a month, to step into the world of religiously inspired pseudoscience. The reason for this is because, as good apostates, it's important that we familiarize ourselves with the finer points of bullshit that we've grown out of to help inoculate ourselves to people's efforts to drag us back, or to drag us into it in the first place if we haven't actually left a religion. Demographically, I'm assuming a decent percentage of people who listen to this in America, where most of my listeners are before podcasting is replaced by a cybernetic hive mind rendering all forms of verbal and written communication obsolete, have left Christianity. Today's topic, unfortunately, is not about the hive mind. I'll be doing that in the future, but it is Baraminology, the study of biblical kinds these creationist shitheads made up. So who do we blame for this? Originally, we blame Frank Lewis Marsh and the year 1944 when his Evolution, Creation, and Science was published. Later, we can blame Kurt Weiss, Walter Riemein, Todd Wood, Neil Dorn, and Roger Sanders. I can only find biographical information on 4 out of 5 of them, so I'm going to be focusing on Marsh, Riemein, Weiss, and Wood. And I'm going to be talking very specifically about their qualifications and how they got to the positions they have. I'm not interested in their personal life, and I'm not really interested in the gossip about them unless it directly affects the views that I'm going to be going after. The major exception to that is if they did something fucked and are unrepentant. That's a line for me. When you can't see what you did, know what was wrong, and change yourself and try to improve yourself and make the world a better place. That doesn't come up in this episode, but I want that to be out there as an all-purpose disclaimer and a segue for a quick fuck you, George Pell. So starting with Marsh. He was born in 1899, which, to tell you where biology was at, that's the end of the decade where we discovered viruses, and graduated from Emmanuel Missionary College in 1929, when that was a bigger deal than it is now. For context, according to this graph from the National Center of Education Statistics, there were around 150,000 bachelor degrees awarded in 1930, and there were over 1 million awarded in 1990. So it's safe to assume that he was 1929 smart guy level, and in 1940 he received a PhD in plant ecology, which has always been and hopefully will always remain a big deal. Then in 1941 he developed the Brahmin shit and published his books Fundamental Biology and Evolution, Creation, and Science. Interestingly, during this time he didn't actually stick too strictly to Brahmin as the term to be applied to it, so the term basic type is going to pop up as a result of that. Then between 1976 he taught. I'm pretty sure he was still teaching in 1976, but that's not the important part here, and everything I can find on these guys is a little weird to read. The important part is that he published Variation and Fixity in Nature, which was about how evolution is bullshit and all the evidence points to microevolution within kinds. Or, for people who know what those series of words mean, evolution. Then in 1993, Walter Riemein wrote The Biotic Message, which claims that it's reasonable to assume that life was designed for survival and to communicate the message, telling where that life came from. The Biotic Message says, quote, "Life is the product of a single designer. Life was intentionally designed to resist all other explanations," end quote, which, of course, life doesn't, namely because, as we'll establish, what they're doing here is stupid bullshit, that life actually does tend to resist non-evolutionary explanations, including Baraminology. He's also known for advancing Haldane's dilemma, which will definitely also be another episode, but the short version is that evolution couldn't go slow enough for evolution to evolution. They claim that it hasn't been adequately addressed by evolution, but given the fact that they don't give a strong enough showing on knowing what they're talking about as far as what is evolution, then I'm not too worried the theory is at stake. Weiss is a young Earth creationist who has a bachelor's in geophysical science from the University of Chicago and a master's and PhD in paleontology from Harvard, and apparently he studied under Stephen Jay Gould, which is a little weird because that means it's reasonable to think he should know what he's talking about. But instead he's been teaching at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and running the Creation Research Center, so I don't know, man, do you? And lastly, and my favorite in this cast, is Todd Wood. Todd Wood may have been made in a lab to replace Ray Comfort in my heart. He has a formal education of a bachelor's in biology from Liberty I'm seriously going to bring up the fact that they talk about being philosophically consistent, and this guy's university just cut their philosophy department and also is not a university. And a PhD in biochemistry from the University of Virginia, where apparently he studied under Dr. William Pearson, who developed a suite of computer programs used for DNA analysis. He's also a founding member of the Baraminology study group and developed the hybrid database to be used in classification research. Actually, I tried to go to the BSG website and my computer was so strenuous and warning me not to do that I'm pretty sure I had a fucking panic attack. So in addition to scaring the shit out of my computer with his shitty, apparently virus-riddled website, Dr. Wood also teaches at Bryan College, where he serves as the director of the Center for Origins Research and associate professor of science. I'm going to read about Bryan College off of their website, which says proudly, Christ above all, Bryan College. So, quote, William Jennings Bryan University was chartered in 1930 and admitted its first class in the fall of that year. Its stated purpose was, and is, to provide for the higher education of men and women under auspices distinctly Christian and spiritual. In 1958, its name was changed to William Jennings Bryan College, and in 1993 was shortened to Bryan College. Now, for those of you who don't know, William Jennings Bryan was the creationist lawyer in the Scopes Monkey trial, so when they heard that Todd Wood graduated from Liberty University, that was a feature, not a bug. So, what do they think that they're doing with all of this? What they think they're doing is holy biology and proving evolution wrong. Or maybe I'm giving them too much credit. Maybe they don't think they are proving evolution wrong. Maybe they're just sitting in the corner rolling their shit into little balls. But they seem to think that evolution is the spontaneous generation of new genetic material, according to Creation Wiki, where they also bitch about how abiogenesis isn't a part of evolution and repeatedly refer to abiogenesis as part of evolution pretty frequently in this article. They also have an issue with the idea of speciation, and I think that's where they get confused. To quote part of their problem, as noted in the above, the speciation aspect of evolution has never been observed. Specialization, however, is observed frequently, and simply occurs when a population adapts to its habitat in a manner that reduces its adaptability in other habitats. This exemplifies a loss of function model in that the ancestors are more adaptable than their descendants. End quote. I'm wondering if this whole thing isn't just the result of somebody being a poor reader, because this does a decent job of summing up the point of the biological evolution section. The idea that descendants aren't as adaptable as their ancestors is also kind of laughable. You know how we know? Because evolution is a process of adaptation. It almost seems like they think ancestors can grow or lose body hair, but once the adaptation happens, it's set in stone forever, and that descendant can never adapt again. That if the dwarf elephants on Rhodes had been introduced to more plentiful food sources, they wouldn't have gotten bigger and eventually quit being dwarf elephants. Carl Sagan explains it this way. He says that if there's a tree, and there's brown bugs on the tree, and it's a brown tree, if every 1 out of 10 bugs on that tree is born white, the birds are going to come down and eat the white bugs because that is not a beneficial adaptation. Now, if for whatever reason the environment changes and the tree turns white, those white bugs are no longer going to be eaten. They're not going to be as easy for the birds to see. And so they're going to be the ones to go on, and they're going to be the ones to breed, and that's going to become a white species of bugs. White species of that bug. Now, where this comes in here is the fact that if the environment reverts for whatever reason or just happens to change so that the tree is brown again, the 1 in 10 bugs that are being born brown are going to become the ones that end up being able to flourish, and they're going to go back to being brown. Basically, that comes down to they don't know what evolution is, and so the whole thing is a straw man they're arguing against with this shit that they made up, and it's really embarrassing because they should know what evolution is. So what they're doing is Baraminology. And Baraminology is the study of biblical kinds, and Brahman is intended to mean created kinds. The process is meant to establish a young earth creationist intelligent design taxonomy that is actually similar to Aristotle's taxonomy of examining each thing for certain qualities and then grouping them accordingly, with no small amounts of ripping off modern biology and evolution in addition to Aristotle, despite what answers in Genesis would have you believe. So the terms a person needs to be familiar with in Baraminology are, firstly, Brahman. This is a poorly defined concept and has been from the start, which lets proponents of evolution, like me, claim that they're just making this shit up, like I do, but of course they're not making it up. I'm lying, and it is a rigorous and well-defined field now. The 2003 paper, A Refined Brahmin Concept, gives us the definition from the founder of Baraminology, Frank Marsh, who wrote, quote, "Organisms which now live have descended from beings of the same kind from which they were created," which isn't a definition regardless of what the paper says, because that's an assertion. But we can pull a definition out of there if we squint and kind of shake our heads. So let's start there, and we'll just try to get granular. So a Brahmin is a group of things, and they are all of the descendants of something that was also the kind of thing that was. Case closed. Except it's not, and as they went on, they gave us more definitions. So the definitions that were handed is that a hollow Brahmin is generally considered to just be a group of Brahmin, the entire group of an organism, excluding nothing. A mono-Brahmin is some, but not all, members of the same Brahmin. An apo-Brahmin is one or more hollow Brahmin. A poly-Brahmin is any mixed grouping that includes members of more than one Brahmin. So an apo-Brahmin, but unlike an apo-Brahmin, it doesn't require that the whole of each Brahmin be included in the classification. An archaea Brahmin is the original created members of a Brahmin. A neo-Brahmin is the set of all currently alive members of a Brahmin, and a paleo-Brahmin is a mono-Brahmin containing all members that were alive at a particular time. This means that if we follow the diagram I found on a Biblical Thinking Students WordPress blog, Adam and Eve are the archaea Brahmin of the human hollow Brahmin, with a mono Brahmin that is made up of caucasoids and mongoloids, and a poly Brahmin of negroids and wolves. That sounds fucked up in the void, but in context it's actually worse. A poly Brahmin can be drawn more or less arbitrarily. According to the definition above, it basically doesn't mean anything. So I'm going to give that a pass. The worst part of this is that the diagram that they used is from an apparent parody site, and when they saw a coupling of black people using terminology from when race realism was used to justify slavery because they were classified as a distinct race separate from whites, and I assume that given the relatively recent at the time, and once in future, mistreatment of natives and Asians, Mongoloids served the same purpose. But there's a coupling of negroids and wolves, and that's problematic. But when they saw that, they thought, oh, this makes the point really well. On the other hand, I have to admit it is kind of nice looking at dog whistly shit from 2011. It reminds me of the good old days where people were racist quietly like they fucking should be if they're going to throw up piece of shit diagrams like that like they mean anything, which these people apparently think it does. So beyond that, the goal of this is to take a poly-Brahmin and break them into mono and then hollow Brahmins to make a bunch of different trees of life they like calling a creationist orchard, like a bunch of dicks. But this does lead to the issue of if there are two things in different Brahmin that are similar, what happens with that cross-species similarity? And to that, Todd Wood swoops in to save the day. With stick figures he drew on purpose to look similar, just like God did. And that's the whole thing about that. So moving on. So how do you tell one Brahmin apart from another Brahmin, especially if God is going around and just making them similar to fuck with us? Well, no one knows. The shorthand is that if they can breed, they're the same Brahmin, so there's that. But for most of it, I'm going to be covering stuff that they're definitely wrong about at the end. Most of it actually fits there. So why are they doing this? They know full well that evolution is overwhelmingly proven. Todd Wood seems to be a pretty major figure in the creation science movement, and even he has said, there is evidence for evolution, and evolution is an extremely successful, scientific, emphasis his, theory. That doesn't make it ultimately true, and it doesn't mean that there cannot possibly be viable alternatives. It is my own faith choice to reject evolution, because I believe the Bible reveals true information about the history of the earth that is fundamentally incompatible with evolution. He admits there that it's a willful ignorance because the evidence doesn't line up with his presuppositions. This is the same guy who said less than a year later that similarities would only exist if God said so, and his acknowledgement that the evidence he's wrong is so strong kind of puts that in an aggressively pathetic light. I know of no other way to say it other than this whole thing is either willful ignorance or the willfully ignorant that are lying to the gullible. Because there's just too much information on what this actually is out there for it to be anything else. So what are they wrong about? This is going to be a little bit of a long trip. I'm going to start with big ideas, and then I'm going to go through their timeline of their definitional backpedaling a little bit, but first I'm going to be petty. So the name of it, the noun in Hebrew grammar comes last. So the actual translation would be kinds creating rather than created kinds, which is different than what they're trying to say. And their arguments against speciation in favor of specialization to go against evolution really doesn't make any sense. They don't seem to understand what a species is. In taxonomy, the hierarchy goes like this, and I'm going to do one for African elephants, and I'm going to rely on the ITIS database for this. So the kingdom of the African elephant is Animalia, and the subkingdom is Bilatera, and the infrakingdom is Deuterostomia, and the phylum is Chordata, the subphylum Vertebrata, the infraphylum Gnathostomata, the superclass Tetrapoda, the class Mammalia, the subclass Theria, infraclass Eutheria, order Proboscidea, the family is Elephantidae, and the genus is Loxodonta, and the species is the Loxodonta africana, which applies to the African savanna elephant, bush elephant, and African elephant. Now, if we expand the genus there, we can see speciation, unless I am wildly misunderstanding the term. From the Loxodonta genus, we get Loxodonta africana, but we also get Loxodonta cyclotis, the African forest elephant. So, according to a Rutgers article I found reprinted on the African Wildlife Foundation website, University of Washington researchers found forest elephants are smaller and have straighter tusks and different skull shapes and are a distinct species because of these adaptive specializations to survive in their environment. The creationists conflated the concepts of Brahman with species, but then tried to differentiate it by claiming that a new species is a jump across kinds, which, as far as I can tell, means jumping across Holobrahman. And honestly, it's hard to tell where that falls on the taxonomy list, because with their arbitrary cutoff point, it could literally be anywhere that they say it is. So Ken Ham makes it sound like it's at the family level, which of course wouldn't make sense. That would take an insane amount of time. That's like saying astrology is bullshit because no one has ever seen a star form. In order to get a new species from the family level, it would take millions of years of evolution, starting with a new genus being developed at the Elephantidae level, and it would probably keep being very similar to an elephant, keeping in mind that below the Elephantidae family are the Elephas and Loxodonta genuses, and that's just all to say Asian or African elephants, and those are easily recognizable as belonging to the same family, so it's hard to tell what they're doing except for really sticking to their guns on being wrong and not making any sense. Or maybe I'm not being fair. Maybe they just don't know what a metaphor is. It would definitely account for biblical literalism on the creation wiki. They take issue from this quote with Charles Darwin. Quote, "In North America, the black bear was seen by Hearn swimming for hours with widely open mouth, thus catching, like a whale, insects in the water. Even in so extreme a case as this, if the supply of insects were constant, and if better adapted competitors did not already exist in the country, I can see no difficulty in a race of bears being rendered by natural selection more and more aquatic in their structure and habits, with larger and larger mouths, till a creature was produced as monstrous as a whale." Now, to anybody who understands evolution, that passage makes sense, because we know that what he's talking about is an imaginary creature hypothetically being evolved into over a super long time. The creationist, however, with their misunderstanding Darwin to prove him wrong boner, thinks that what is meant here is that Darwin sees no issues with a bear becoming a whale, and that this is what we defend with adaptation and variation. Adaptation, of course, being what Darwin is talking about here, and variation being the speciation mentioned previously that would occur in the creation of the subaquatic big-mouth river bear. So again, they're just wrong all the fucking way down. They can't understand that he was talking about a hypothetical whale bear creature, not saying that bears become whales and then insisting that they're right, because we'd be idiots if we thought what they think we think. And they would call this macroevolution and then say adaptations are microevolution, rather than just realizing that what this relies on is the fact that small things can make big things if you have enough of them. Say the number 1, and then add 1. And then do that again and again until you have what you would consider a big number. It's like that. One of the mistakes that this leads us to is that they accept DNA. And that's hugely problematic because DNA is a huge player in the evolution game right now. So they only accept it as long as it proves their pre-existing ideas. such as rejecting that humans and other primates are related even when their own methods show they are. And their methods have shown we are related to other apes. And they reject even that basic biological truth with the same willful ignorance it takes to misunderstand Darwin or stick figures that badly. AIG goes so far as to crap on Ken Miller for not understanding that chromosomes can't fuse, which of course they can, and Dr. Miller explains both this and the fact that he's Catholic in a short YouTube video in the show notes. So, to move on to the definitions of Brahman, because I don't have anything else I can say about that. In the Refined Concepts paper, they summarize Marsh's view essentially as, if they are the same morphologically, they are the same Brahman. But if they're not the same morphologically, they might be the same Brahman. And then they go on to claim that Marsh somewhat contradicted the claim that if P, then Q, if not P, then maybe Q, although I can't figure out how. We're then informed that the claim that Brahman never cross is tautological, which isn't how tautologies work. If things that are morphologically the same can breed are part of the same Brahman, except that if they are morphologically the same and can't crossbreed, they might be part of the same Brahman, but also if they're morphologically different and can't crossbreed, then it's the same. A tautology is when you have P or P, or when you have P and P, and this dictates a necessary logical truth. It doesn't dictate that the thing is true as an existential claim, but it does dictate that if you have cotton candy or cotton candy, you're ending up with cotton candy. Unicorn and a unicorn? Homie, you have a unicorn. So what the paper presents us with is a string of sometimes self-contradictory definitions that do not constitute P or P and P, and we're told it's a tautology. Unless they mean just an English department tautology, which is defined as the saying of the same thing twice in different words. This doesn't do that either. This says something and then something similar. And at this point, we have three definitions that are occasionally in conflict with each other, and we're not told which ones have precedent. To be clear, we're told in the paper, if two things can breed, they are the same Brahman. If two things are morphologically the same, they are the same Brahman. If two things are morphologically different, they might be the same Brahman. So what about mules? What Brahman do mules belong to? They can't hybridize, being sterile, but they are the results of two species having a hybrid animal. If the definition states that we have two things breeding, means they're part of the same Brahman, do we resort to the morphological similarities for the mule? Or does the definition include the offspring without that being stated as a rule? What about the OACE2 skull, which is thought to belong to a Neanderthal human hybrid? Would they accept that? Kangaroos and rabbits both have big ears and big strong hind legs for hopping around. According to traditional taxonomy, they're related at the mammalia level, and because of that, not really related. According to Baraminology, would they be part of the same Brahman based on morphological similarities? It would kind of make sense, but there's a lot of differences, so it also makes sense that they aren't because of those differences and the fact that they can't interbreed, which, if we're being honest, is sort of a tenuous requirement. What threshold has to be met for two things to be considered part of the same Brahman? And their problem here isn't non-existing tautologies, it's bad definitions. Because if they had good definitions, they'd get the results they're trying to avoid. There's also the issue that they're trying to craft their definition around expected results to fit animals where they want them so that they can hand-wave away everything else instead of just following the evidence, because that leads to evolution. They do try, though. In 1993, Siegfried Scherer gave what they say in a paper is two criteria for a basic type, which it is, in a not really kind of way. I'm going to give the quote and then dissect it. Quote, two organisms belong to a basic type if they, quote, in a quote, they are able to hybridize, end quote, in a quote, or if they, quote, in a quote, they have hybridized with the same third organism, end quote, in a quote. He qualified these criteria with the third claim that, quote, in a quote, two organisms belong to the same basic type if ellipses, in a quote, embryogenesis of a hybrid continues beyond the maternal phase, including subsequent coordinated expression of both maternal and paternal morphogenetic genes, end quote, in a quote. And it seems pretty clear what the authors of Revised mean. So we have two criteria, which is two organisms belong to a basic type if they are able to baby make. If they can baby make with the same third thing but not each other, they belong to the same basic type, which kind of seems like a go fuck yourself. And the third of the two criteria, if they are able to have a baby and not just make one. For profit somehow, I assume. it's unspoken. The problem they claim with this is that it only applies to sexually reproducing species. I have a different issue with it. They claim that it's verifiable by experimentation, which sounds an awful lot like just knocking up shit and seeing what dies. They claim that Scherer's third criterion of the 2 criterion, which I'm not actually convinced qualifies as criteria, it seems like an addendum, but what do words mean? So his third of 2 Flibben addresses this problem, but all that says is if they can produce an offspring similar to the parents. That doesn't address the issue of organisms that don't reproduce sexually. They then go on to just nuke the whole fucking thing anyway by saying hybridization failure can be caused by any number of factors and doesn't predict anything, saying, honestly, the thing that pissed me off the most out of all of this. Quote, while it could be argued that discontinuity could be a corollary that arises from the study of identified basic types, it certainly would not be an a priori prediction of basic type biology. That's not actually as bad a problem as they think it is. You don't really want the goal to be a priori knowledge. You're aiming for a posteriori, which is based on experience and observation. A priori is derived from theory, and a priori knowledge isn't bad in itself. Math and logic, which, admittedly, as my friend puts it, just turns English into math, you son of a bitch, are derived from theory. But what they're actually looking for is a posteriori. They want something observable, and the fact that what they're looking for and where they think their problem is detached from empirical observation is really pretty telling. But as we've seen, they're not going to let a little thing like their theory not working get in the way of insisting their theory is working. They say that the issues with the theory should not inhibit the practical use of basic type biology where you can squeeze it in because it's philosophically consistent. Except, yes, it should. See, the theory underlying something isn't super duper the important part. This is an extension of their evolution is just a theory bullshit. They don't understand that the theory underlying something isn't what the facts are supporting. The theory is the way that the facts fit together. They're trying to wear their pants backwards and then can't figure out why they can't find the zipper and keep pissing down their leg. The way that it works is that we have a series of facts. And we found those facts through a series of ideas and through a series of questions, possibly through a theory, but it's not all we had. We went on to find facts. When we find those facts, we have to find a way for those facts to fit together. So we look at them and find the best way that they work together, and then use that to make predictions, which tests the cogency of the theory. Now, the reason I say cogency is because when you make predictions, it's inductive reasoning, and you measure induction and strength and cogency. See the video of Ken Miller in the show notes, which touches on the fact that evolution would have been wrong if they hadn't found that the reason we have one less pair of chromosomes compared to our ape cousins is because 2 of them fused together to create chromosome 2. That's because theory is an induction. It can be wrong if the premises are true, and the premises are the facts. The theory is how we get from the facts to the conclusion. The Baraminologists are doing this backwards. They're trying to twist the facts to fit their theories because they feel that they have all true premises in their argument, so their conclusion that God is real and their shit is true is guaranteed. This means that when facts don't fit, because they think their theory is deductively sound, they have the wrong facts and not the wrong theory, because they think that the facts are just the practical showing of what the theory is. I want to leave this episode on the words of Roger Sanders. So I'm going to get my part out of the way. I am Phineas 12 Gauge. This has been the Apostate Seminary. The Twitter is @X Essential Panda, and the email is poweredbyapostasy@gmail.com. And Roger Sanders said of Baraminological taxonomy, the cognita are not based on explicit or implicit comparisons of characters or biometric distance measures, but on the gestalt of the plants and the classification response it elicits in humans. And that is an impressively fancy way of saying, we're just making this shit up as we go.